Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Planning for your next trip? Elevate your travel style with Quince. Quince has all the jet-setting essentials you'll want for your next getaway, like European linen, premium luggage options, buttery soft Italian leather bags, and so much more. And it's all priced at 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Plus, Quince only works with factories that use safe and ethical manufacturing practices. Pack your bags with high-quality essentials you'll be wearing for vacations to come with Quince. Go to quince.com/trip for free shipping and 365-day returns.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah, Randy.
Since we founded Bombas, we've always said our socks, underwear, and T-shirts are super soft. Any new ideas?
Maybe sublimely soft.
Or disgustingly cozy.
Wait, what?
I got it. Bombas. Absurdly comfortable essentials for yourself
and for those facing homelessness.
Because one purchased equals one donated.
Wow, did we just write an ad?
Yes.
Bombas. Big comfort for everyone. Go to bombas.com/ACAST and use code ACAST for 20% off your first purchase.
Folks, a quick reminder, there is a discount code that has been added to the Hellion website since the time of recording, specifically for this episode. If you've been fascinated by Gary's research and want to find out a little more, why not head over to hellion.co.uk, select Glory is Fleeting, the relevant book in which you'll find the chapter that Gary has based all of this podcast upon, and you'll be able to enjoy 20% off if you use the discount code GLORY23, GLORY23. It only works via the Hellion website, so you do need to buy it direct. Go to hellion.co.uk, type in Glory is Fleeting, and then use the discount code GLORY23, GLORY23, to enjoy 20% off. Enjoy. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of what was a fantastic instalment on the French perspective of the Battle of Salamanca. I am joined once again by Gary Wills here on the Napoleonic Wars pod. In case you've forgotten, Gary is the author of Wellington's First Battle, The Men Behind the Memorial, Wellington at Bay, and Throwing Thunderbolts. The latter is on the War of the First Coalition, 1792-7. But today we are talking, or rather continuing the conversation, on Gary's work on McCune at Salamanca. If you haven't listened to part 1, you're going to need to go and listen to part 1, partly because it's really eye-opening, and you can kind of hear the historical cogs at work in certainly my brain as I try and sort of work out the implications of all of this. But also part 2 won't make any sense if you don't go and listen to part 1. So go listen to part 1. And then come back for this one. Gary, great to see you again. Thank you for sticking with it for what's going to be an extended recording session from the looks of things. Let's dive straight back into this. So we were just talking about the whole Marmont's about to ride off and, inverted commas, save the day, and is sort of laying the blame very squarely at McCune's feet, certainly in his memoir, written a long time after the event, we should say. I'm skeptical about some of that, but you've made the important point that actually perhaps Marmont is somebody who, and French commanders generally are the sorts of people who would actually just kind of get their backsides over there and say, look, this is exactly what I want you to do. More kind of Wellingtonian in style there. But of course, that's not what happens for Marmont. He gets wounded. So what does McCune actually physically do during all of this? Let's just park all of the supposition and all of the misconceptions and the conflicting evidence. What do we know about what the heck McCune's division actually end up doing when they have to face Leith?
What we know is that McCune sent I'll step back. McCune organised his division into 2 brigades, one behind the other. he sent his skirmishers forward towards Arapiles village, which to a certain extent, which is known because we know what the British said. So it, to a certain extent, contradicts Marmont's memoirs, which implies that McCune had sent the whole division down towards the village. What is up for grabs is exactly where that conflict between Leith and McCune took place. As we said in the first episode, Oman has it taking place to the southwest of the village of Arapiles. I think there's a very strong case that it was actually to the southeast of the village. And if we go back to, and we remember what Marmont said, that he wanted McCune on the extreme right end of the tablelands. And so here I positioned him in a different position. I think McCune's role in this was to be the hinge, part of the hinge on which Thomier's and Tarpan's divisions deployed behind him. And so he approached not from the north-south axis, but I believe on the southeast to northeast. This has a number of advantages to think about it. One is that there are these ridgelines, and if you look at them using the Spanish geographic mapping systems, you can see these ridgelines quite clearly, and it allows you to position McCune's division consistent with some of the descriptions that we've got. So we know the artillery was further back than the infantry, which, by the way, if it was where Oman said it was, the artillery would have been the other side of the hill. And it gives us positions on which McCune's voltigeurs could advance towards. So that works. The other thing that works really well with this is that later in the day, after Leith has attacked and beaten McCune, Spry's Portuguese division is sucked off by to the left by Beresford to help out repelling the French counterattack. Now, if McCune was where Oman had him, they would have been, a good part of a mile away when they did that march. Spry's after action report said his men virtually had to just turn left and march off. They had no distance to cover. So I think there's a very strong case built up of lots of weak signals that McCune was positioned here on this intermediate piece of land, which I highlighted on Oman's map in the last episode, not on the Monte d'Azan as Oman would have it. And it makes a lot of sense in a number of ways. If we look at the rest of the divisions and around McCune at this time, you have Thomier's division being hurried towards him, towards his open flank, and you have Talpan and Clausel behind him. And I think you can understand here where how the cavalry attack on McCune would have played out. Interestingly, the other piece of evidence which I think goes this way is if you compare the accounts of Wallace's brigade with Leith's division, they don't mix. They contact one another, but they don't mix. If Leith had been attacking south across the Monte d'Azan, pushing McCune out of the way, he would have run big time into Wallace's brigade, and they didn't. And so for me, it's a fairly strong case. I think when you think about did McCune go too close to the Arapalis village? Well, yeah, if it had stood a bit further back, he wouldn't have been as vulnerable to the attack by Leith and the cavalry as standing where I've put him here. But you've got a much more coherent battle line. And as I say, the other thing that makes sense with this is that Talpan's leading the 6th Division, whose job was to fill the gap between the 7th Division and the 5th Division. So it's quite sensible that McCune would stay where he was. And he was embarrassed by the British cavalry because Talpan hadn't got to secure his left flank.
Folks, I'm going to urge you, if you're listening to this on the radio version, to head over to the YouTube channel and take a look at the maps that are going in to support this, because it does help massively to not put too fine a point on it. And I'm looking at this and I'm seeing a lot of logic in what Gary is saying, because as you've always got to think about these guys as thinking people. Don't just assume that they're dumb and they've got to these places where they have in life by chance. And if you're McCune and you're standing there facing north as Leith comes at you, you would know that your left flank would be absolutely wide open, because you know that Tomier's somewhere over there, but you can't see him. There's no form of contact between the two because he's all the way at the other end of the Monte de Zan. And we know he's at the other end of the Monte de Zan because we know from the British accounts of where they make contact with Tomier's men. So what that therefore means is that we're having to believe that McCune is happy to just leave that left flank waving in the air whilst Talpan comes along and fills it whenever he deigns to. And instead, with what Gary's put on this map, actually, by no means is his left flank secure, but it's not quite as cruelly exposed as it might otherwise have been, because, as Gary said, you know, in this version, you have McCune facing, what would this be, northwest, which has a deal of sense to it. So there you go. Head over to the YouTube channel to try and see this for yourself, because there's no sense in me just trying to sort of describe it and visualize it for you.
I think the other thing about this positioning is one of the questions I posed at the beginning is, how did McCune get away from what was a very serious attack? He was attacked by Leith from the front, a very serious attack. Darnaud, the brigade commander of the first brigade, was wounded and in fact captured. I think 3 of the 4 battalion leaders were wounded or killed. One of the battalions was being led by a captain in that first brigade. It was a massive attack, and so the question is, how did they survive? And I think when you look at it in this position, as McCune's division breaks under the combined assault of Leith and Le Marchand, what happens is they run into the divisions behind them, Talpan and Clausel. So there's thousands and thousands of soldiers there. There aren't that many British cavalry. So even though it was a very effective charge, there's still the opportunity for certainly Montfort's brigade to get away without too many casualties. And yeah, Darnaud's brigade was very badly affected, as we said earlier on. But you can see how they could have escaped if they're in this position at the end of the on the tableland before Monte de Zan, rather than a mile down the road towards Tomier's.
This is really interesting.
And this just makes the point that the sixth division should be between the fifth and seventh, and it hadn't got there when this all happened.
No, it really hadn't, had it?
No.
Do we know why Topin is so? I was going to be mean and say slow, which is perhaps unnecessarily unkind of me. But I mean, Topin's not where he should be by any measure. Do we know why?
I should imagine the fault is more with Tomier's. The ground is fairly broken that they've come over. I should imagine the thing that makes it look odd is Tomier's so far advanced, so far ahead of the rest of the divisions. And you could argue that, McCune is just a few hundred yards too close to the rapid. With hindsight, he might have stopped at the ridge before, rather than the ridge he's put his artillery on, rather than the one I've got him stopped at. I don't think he was further down because the British are fairly clear. It was only his voltigeurs that were on the forward slopes. They say that McCune's men, Darnell's men, were still on the high ground, which is why I've put them where I have.
Okay, so at this point, shall we? I'm still digesting this. It's a really interesting concept. I need to get back out there and have another look at the land and see this for myself, because inevitably you go there with the received opinion in your mind, and so you look at it and try and sort of work it out that way, but you're in the process actually you end up not reading other aspects of the landscape. And
yes, particularly because I've stood on the top of the Greater Arapel and and looked across, took photographs and all of that. But actually, the thing to remember is a guy's only 5'5" high at this time, so you don't have to have a great ridge for it to be a position. So these little ridgelets are equally useful positions for him to line up on, and more importantly, are consistent with the accounts that the British have left us.
And there's also a point to be made that no feature on the battlefield of Waterloo is anywhere near as significant as the majority of the features that you see on the Salamanca battlefield. In terms of how deep the valleys are and how high the ridges are. No, they're not Himalayan, of course they're not, but they are still higher and more significant than what you see today at Mont Saint Jean. And even if you allow for the heights have dropped because of farming and erosion and all the rest of it, so that's also been the case at Salamanca. So you can't win the argument that way. This is really interesting. Shall we move on to talk about Ferry?
Yes.
At this point.
So my contention is that there's no question that Leith and Le Marchand defeated and broke McCune's division. Even the French accounts say that. I think they were protected because they ran through the other supporting divisions, and that's why they didn't get more beaten up. But the point I made earlier there then comes into play. This happened at 5:00 in the afternoon, and the rear guard took place 5 hours later, and that gave time for Clausel, who was the eventual commander of the army, to rally the remainder of the left wing of the French army. And the early French accounts in the 1830s all make this point, that Clausel collected together units from the left wing on the position that Ferry eventually defended. So I know forgive me, I've not studied the French counterattacks and all of that, but so I'm jumping ahead in the battle.
So let me just kind of add a little tiny bit of context for folks who haven't listened to other episodes on Salamanca. So what effectively happens, folks, is Wellington's attack goes in a series of phases, and it's meant to sort of almost ripple across the French position. Third Division effectively ends up taking on Thomières. Fifth Division, Leith's, ends up taking on McCune's. So Fifth Division versus Fifth Division in this case. And then the Fourth Division, which is the weakest division of Wellington's forces, ends up trying to break. Oh Lord, is it Clausel or Bonnet's division? That's a faux pas on my part. We'll leave this in the final edit. You got any thoughts, Gary? Is it Clausel or is it? Because they both end up.
They both ended up getting a really hard time.
Yeah, didn't they? So yes, one way or another. Oh, that's going to bug me all day. I think it's Clausel. I think it's Clausel's division ends up being attacked by Fourth Division, fends them off, and then follows up. And it doesn't go well because Wellington has the reserves there in the form of Sixth Division. He just sends them forward. They then break the French counterattack. And then with effectively French left and French centre having been beaten, there's not a vast amount left for the French to do other than to start trying to salvage things from the situation. And so the Greater Arapal is abandoned by the 120th Legion, which is in Bonnet's division, and they pull back effectively. And so we get to the final stand. Over to you, I guess, Gary.
Yeah, just before we move on to Ferry, I skipped over this slide earlier on, so I really need to bring it back. This is the pinned tweet on my Twitter, and Professor Muir kindly wrote, "Just finished reading Gary Wills's account of McCune's division at the Battle of Salamanca in glorious fleeting, full of interesting new information and a very plausible argument about the access of Leith's attack southwest rather than south." So can't say any more than that.
And this is why I have so much love for Rory, because he is always open to fresh ideas. And, some of your work is inevitably going to fly in the face of some of his work. Does he turn around and go, oh, no, that can't possibly be the case. I've written a book on Salamanca and I'm Rory Muir. Couldn't be less like the guy to come out with something like that. Wouldn't even occur to him. Here's some decent evidence. Here's a plausible argument, and goes, this is really interesting, people. Go read it and judge for yourself.
And he gave me some stuff for the bit on Ferry that I'm about to talk to. So the classic account of Ferry's defence is that his division was left all alone. Everybody else had run off. And we have this from a French eyewitness. And the classical description, and I'll show it in this map, the Ferry deployed his battalions in a single line. The ones on the end were in square, which shortens their line. And that's great description. The guy who described it was only a captain at the time, so easy for him not to know what else was going on the battlefield, was my contention. The thing that's really interesting is when you put that up against what the British did. So they sent Clinton's division to attack Ferry, but on his left he had Cole's division, and Leith's division, now commanded by Pringle, was on his right. Now, when you work out what frontages those divisions would have had, even allowing for casualties, there's no way Ferry could have held them off, not for the length of time that is said in the accounts on his own, because this was a ferocious battle.
But also, you wouldn't need to. Wellington wouldn't allow it. Why would you send in what we're looking at here? Basically, 3 divisions to deal with 1 French division. This is the army that has literally just shattered multiple French divisions one-on-one. You wouldn't need to. There's nothing unique about Ferry's division. They're not suddenly made up of superhuman individuals. you'd send
So,
one division to do the job. It doesn't make sense. It always has struck me as overkill.
yeah, so the only makes sense if the French had other units there. And I think there's at least a case that part of McCune's division was there. And I'll come back to that when we talk about flags, because the 11th Foot captured a green flag during this part of the action. And that in itself is interesting. Not many people have asked the question as to what that green flag was. And that's one of the things I want to come on to. So my argument is that other regiments, according to the early French accounts, were on that ridge defending against those three British divisions, holding the line for the rest of the army to get away. And I think McCune's battalions are at least as likely as any others to be part of that, particularly the Second Brigade. But I also think some of the First Brigade.
Let me talk about timings with you here. So we've had the British 4th Division, Allied 4th Division, apologies to Portuguese and Spanish listeners, not to disparage against the contribution of particularly Portuguese troops during this battle. So the Allied 4th Division breaks, is that the Allies then have to face a counterattack in the centre. 6th Division plugs the gap, breaks the counterattack. What time have we got to once the Greater Arab has been abandoned? This final stand of Ferry plus, as you know, as we're discussing, it seems increasingly plausible, plus others. What kind of time have we got to in terms of making all of that happen? Because the distances aren't vast, but it still takes time to stop your men. You've got to reorganize, make sure that the holes are plugged in your individual battalions, lines, and all the rest of it, close up, and all of that. Where have we got to?
Both accounts accounts on both sides talk about this happening in ending in darkness, and the French were allowed to slip away because it had already got dark. Now, when you look at the when that is, you're talking after 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. So the fighting will have taken place in dusk, and it's a good 5 hours after McCune and the 40,000 men have been defeated in 40 minutes. So that gives loads of time for McCune, particularly, to bring his division back into order if he's got away.
It does. And it also, because there's another point here about Wellington and the British. Why would they wait this long to attack a solitary French division making a stand to try and cover a rear guard? Yes, you've got to allow the time to reorganize, but it doesn't take 5 hours to get from, even if you're walking it, folks, rather than driving it, doesn't take 5 hours to march from the village of Los Arapiles, or however you pronounce it, apologies, Spanish listeners, to the position of Ferry's last stand. 2 maybe. Sure, these guys are under fire and all the rest of it, but even 2 is being generous.
Well, the calculation I did had, if McCune had run all the way and his guys had, in fact, if they'd marched all the way to regulation marching speed, they would have been at Alba de Tormes at 7:30 in the evening.
Okay. Well, that in itself says a lot, right? Because
it's still going on at a bit after dark.
Exactly. And the British aren't just going to sort of stand around, and I know people love a cliche about us Brits, but we don't just sort of sit down and have a cup of tea as soon as the fighting peters out. If there wasn't something stops the British from pressing on, that can only be not only a large body of troops, but a large body of well-formed troops, because broken troops would be harried by either infantry or the light cavalry. There's an opportunity here. So this is, granted, it's circumstantial evidence, but logic indicates that this wasn't a cakewalk once 3rd and 5th Division had broken Tomier and McCune.
Yeah, whatever happens, and I said at the beginning, this is all weak signals. The one thing you can be pretty sure of is Ferry would not have lasted 5 minutes on that ridge alone, with Leith turning it, with Pringle's division outflanking him on that side, because Pringle's closer to Albert de Tormes than he is. So, something more went on there. And, to be fair, the French accounts in the 1830s are all clear that Clausel rallied the divisions of the French left to help the rearguard action. And it goes on to the point I made earlier on, is that Girard has McCune on the bridge at Albert de Tormes after dark, the last senior general there, because obviously Ferry's dead. And, you can disbelieve that if you like, but I tend to believe it.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom, like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
So interesting what happens when you look again hard at the sources. Okay, you mentioned flags earlier. Let's bring the business of this green flag in. What does the green flag signify?
Well, I'll come to that.
There's more.
Let's talk about the Eagles.
Okay, this is a knotty little problem. Go on.
So in Wellington's dispatch, he talks about 2 eagles and 6 colours being taken. Now, this picture I'm showing is in the Royal Collection, and I couldn't afford to publish it in my book, so I didn't. In my chapter, so I didn't. So, but what it clearly shows is the eagle of the 22nd and another eagle, which doesn't have a number on the caisson, which causes confusion later. It also shows, and perhaps I've tried to pick these out. The other thing it shows are the banderoles of the 2 regiments. The 22nd Linear on the left, one's red and one's white, and of the 62nd Linear on the right, one's red and one's white. And we therefore can identify the eagle as being the eagle of the 62nd, because it says so on the banderole. And we know from letters in Pringle's archives in Manchester, which I think have just been published by Gareth, that it was the combined light companies of Leith's brigade, Leith's division, that captured the eagle of the 62nd, and they specifically mentioned the 62nd. So we'll come back to those in a minute. But the other thing they show is behind them at the back on the right is a fanion of an unknown regiment, or battalion rather.
So just explain to folks what a fanion is.
Right. So Oman does actually talk about this, but it's more controversial than he thought. When Napoleon took the Eagles off of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th battalions, what he wanted was them to carry a plain flag with no decoration. And this there was a hiatus for some time while they decided what the design should be. But in the early part of 1812, a decree was published which said what they should carry, which were these completely plain flags with spear points, just as you see in this drawing. And the second battalions would carry a white one, and the 5th battalions would carry a green one. And it was important that these flags had nothing on them because they were supposed to be of limited value. And the thing that's interesting about this drawing is it was drawn in August 1812. So after the prizes, the trophies were took back to London, this was drawn and published. And so it puts an end to these stories about 3 eagles being captured at Salamanca and all of that.
Yeah, it does get bandied around, doesn't it? The suggestion that one of them just gets ripped apart because they think it's gold. Well, yeah.
Well, the other thing that belies that is in the French records. So here's a nice.
Can we just stay with that a second? You just said there, the other thing that belies that is the French records. Just expand on that.
I will in a minute, in a few slides. I just wanted to illustrate how these banderoles were used.
Okay.
So this is from the Funkens uniform book. Obviously, the guy in the middle is carrying an eagle with the 1812 to 15 flag on, rather than the one we're interested in. But you can see that the 2nd and 3rd eagle bearers are carrying the banderoles to defend the eagle. That's their job. And this shows the taking of the 62nd eagle by the light companies of Leith's division. Neither of these, I mean, Krista's done an excellent rendition, but neither of them shows the 2nd and 3rd eagle bearers that were present. And the importance of this is that if you read Pringle's correspondence, the guys who actually took the flags were from the 3 different regiments that made up the light company battalion that was put together from Leith's 1st Brigade. And Pratt is one of those people. And what appears to have happened is that they took the Eagle Party intact. One regiment went off with the Eagle. Another regiment went off with one of the banderoles, and Pratt went off with the other banderole. Now, Pratt's role subsequently got blown up into taking another eagle, and the eagle of the 22nd, but he didn't. That's a clear myth. What happened was this whole Eagle Guard was taken prisoner, and as should have happened, because the Eagle Guards, the 2nd and 3rd Eagle Guards, are there to defend the eagle. They're not going to run off and leave the eagle bearer on his own. So yes, they would get both sets of these would get captured. And you were asking about records. If you after the battle, there are records recording things like where the eagles were. There's a specific column that says eagles lost to the enemy, and this one shows the page that has the 66th line and the 101st line, and there appears to have been a clerical error because it says that the 62nd didn't lose an eagle, but the 101st did. Well, we know it was the other way around. Sharry, who is the great expert on French flags, actually talks about a guy called Daltpole seeing these trophies in London, and he claimed he saw the eagle of the 101st that had been captured at Salamanca. Well, we saw from the diagram I've just shown you, the eagles didn't have their flags on them. So you couldn't tell which regiment it was, other than from the caissons on the on the eagles themselves, and the caisson of the 62nd didn't have a number on it. Mm-hmm. So he couldn't possibly have seen anything. That he assumed it was the eagle of the 101st, presumably because of this clerical error, but it wasn't. It was the eagle of the 62nd, as evidenced by the reports in Pringle's correspondence. So that leaves us with the eagle of the second, the 22nd, which is up in Lancashire, while the 62nd is in Chelmsford. And the eagle of the 22nd is in Lancashire because Pratt was assumed to have taken it. And this is from a blog post I did, which I called The History of a Salamanca Myth. We all like a good myth, don't we?
Oh, we love myths busting on this show.
Yeah. And this is a citation. What I did was I went back through all of the records trying to find out when this story about Pratt taking the eagle of the 22nd came about. And the interesting thing is that Pratt never claims it. It's not in the history of his regiment, the 30th. In neither of the histories of the regiment, the 30th, do they claim that he took this eagle. And what happened was in 1912, a guy called Fraser wrote the War Drama of the Eagles, and in it said the eagle of the 22nd was captured by a British officer of the 30th, Ensign Pratt, attached for duty to Major Cruikshank's 7th Portuguese Light Infantry Caçadores Battalion, serving with the 3rd Division. That's what he said. And this is where the Ensign Pratt story starts. And it's why in 1947, when the Eagles were distributed to the regiments, it went to the 30th. But actually, none of it is true. We know from Cruikshank's own statement of service that it wasn't Ensign Pratt. It was, you think you've got troubles with pronunciation, Capital Geronimo Pereira de Vasconcelos of the 12th Caçadores. And Pratt was never attached to the Portuguese. So, as I say, there's a lot of talk at the moment about repatriating museum artifacts. The eagle of the 22nd should be on that list. It should be in Lisbon.
There is a thought for... There'll be some arguments about that, I'm sure. But yeah, okay.
I think the interesting thing is if you go back and trace the history, where's it come from? And I think the Garland, I know Carol Duval turned up Garland's letter, which claimed that Pratt went through the camp with a French eagle. No, he didn't. He went through the camp with a French banderole.
Important difference.
Just a bit, like handed from the hands of the emperor. So the next part of it is to talk about the Fanians. Yes. And they're interesting for a lot of reasons, and not least of which is Shari, who's the great expert on French standards, says that these Fanians in the colours that I've talked about came about too late for them to officially be in the peninsula. And so their presence in the peninsula has not been reported until you look at that.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was about to say. But we know that they must have been, because otherwise, why is this guy in London drawing them in August 1812?
Correct. So if we look at the white Fanian, and the thing about the Fanians, which I think is very distinctive, is they have no writing on them. That was the directive, and because they have no writing on them, as Shari says, you can't exclude the fact that the regimental colonels would just make them up. Just get a bit of white material, stick it on your spear, and you've got a Fanian. So they're easy to be made. And so we then asked, well, where'd the white Fanian come from? And if we look at the regiments that lost more than 50% at Salamanca, there were the 66th, the 22nd, the 62nd, and the 101st. Of these, the 62nd and the 101st lost more than 75% of their men. Of the 2nd battalions involved, only the 2nd 101st was not in the order of battle in September. Because what happened to the French is they kept their level of veteran troops high in their service battalions just by disbanding destroyed battalions and sending the men into the remaining battalions. This happened at Villamuriel and everywhere. And so the chances are it's much more likely that 2nd Battalion White Fanion is from the 101st. And
so sorry, just to make sure that I've understood this rightly, on the basis that, and I'm reading what you've written again, folks, can't emphasize enough to fully appreciate everything. You're not only going to want to hear the rest of this, but go look at it on the YouTube channel to double check these bits of information that are coming through on the screen. So because they lose so heavily because the 101st lose so heavily at Salamanca, effectively by September, they've been merged into a single battalion. And
they'll have been. I mean, I know better what happened to the 66th from Villamuriel, but and I'll come on to the 66th. The battalion cadre gets sent back to the depot, and their remaining soldiers get distributed amongst the field battalions that are still there. So when you look at the orders of battle for the French, there are some significant battalions missing in September and October when I was interested in Villamuriel that were at Salamanca, and the 2nd 101st is one of them. It could have been one of the other 2nd battalions, could have been, but most of these battalions would give up their flags only in duress. So my vote, if I was a betting man, I'd bet it was the 101st, but it could have been the 62nd. We don't know.
And they also, as you say in this extract, they also lose their Jingling Johnny, which quite often I see people post as, oh, look, here's an eagle being taken. And it really gets my goat.
I'm glad, because it gets mine as well.
I tell you what really irritated me, actually. I was in the Sarko Military Interpretation Center, and they've got this label up saying French Eagle. And you know what it is? It's a Jingling Johnny.
Yeah.
It's not an eagle. And you look at it and you sort of think, but it's not quite a museum, but it's an interpretation center. They're just way off the mark.
Well, I think these sorts of mistakes with Google are unforgivable. There are ways people... Google would tell you that's not what it is.
No, exactly. There are ways
to take a photograph of it and put it into Google.
Exactly. It's not that hard to do the research and get the right interpretation. Okay, so let's progress the green flag.
The green flag. Now, one of the things I did was I went through War Flags, which is a book of illustrations of all of their standards that were in the chapel, the Guards Chapel, and all of this. And in there, you find this picture of a plain green flag, and they label it East Indian flag, presumably because it's got a fluffy bit at the top. But the interesting thing is it has no markings on it. My contention is that's a 5th Battalion Fanion, and probably the one captured by the 11th Foot at Salamanca. So we have to look at, well, what are the 5th battalions at Salamanca?
My next question, because sadly the order of battle is not seared into my memory.
No, there were 3 5th battalions at Salamanca. 2 of them were in Macoun's division, and one was in Ferry's division, the 5th 26th. So the easy option here is to say, well, it's the 5th 26th, isn't it? Because that was in Ferry's division. However, of these 3 battalions, if you look at the losses, give you a clue as to what happened next. The 5th 66th disappeared from the order of battle and was replaced. His cadre sent home and replaced by another battalion at Villamuriel, whereas the 5th 26th and the 5th 82nd survived. In fact, these are Fortescue's figures. The 1st of August account suggests the 5th 26th hardly lost any men. So whether that's right or wrong is another matter. But the point I made in my chapter was you have to at least consider that the 5th 66th of McCoon's division is the one who lost their Fanion to the 11th Foot. And if I was going to rub it in a little bit, is that if you look at the standard deployment of the battalions in the divisions, the 11th Foot would have been on the opposite end of Ferry's line to the 26th Linear. So I think it's a question that I'm prepared to pose without saying, yeah, this is a given. But I think the bigger question is we now know that these Fanions were a thing in the peninsula, which is a novel finding itself.
It's a nice thing to come out of this research, isn't it?
So, and I guess to finish the whole point, we go back to our friend McCune. This is the conclusion of my chapter. Glory is fleeting, but it is more so when your commander-in-chief casts you as the fall guy 33 years after your death. However, General Division Antoine Louis Papon Baron de McCune, his bravery, 9 wounds, 28 years service to France. If not, his skill as a general will be remembered so long as the Arc de Triomphe stands.
Yes. So really, firstly, I'm impressed by the class of the writing there. That's a nice way to wrap things up. But my brain is hurting ever so slightly. It's been a long time since I've recorded a podcast as a host and had to think this much that my brain has hurt at the end of it. But you've achieved that. So congratulations, because it's rare that my brain has to work quite this hard during a recording session.
My chapter
I genuinely do. I don't have a copy of Gloria's Fleeting, which is an embarrassing admission for the guy who's supposed to be asking all of the pertinent questions on this show. Gary,
the other thing that's interesting is in preparation for this, while Professor Muir's book is the best book on Salamanca, this is my favourite one, which I read, Wellington's Masterpiece, which I read 30 odd years ago. And so I thought I'd get it out and look at it. And it's the only account that seems to understand there was an issue about Leith's division capturing an eagle from the 7th Division rather than from McCune's 5th Division. And because they make a point, was the light infantry must have been off to the flank somewhere. And but it's an important point that I think goes to my argument that the rush of fugitives from Thomières and in the face of the cavalry swept McCune's division aside, and they got away to fight another hour, while Leith's division busied themselves rounding up prisoners from the 7th, including the eagle that they took of the 62nd.
It's only when you lay something out quite as clearly as you've done over the course of this that you do start to sit back and think more and more about the inconsistencies and go, why hasn't somebody noticed all of these problems before? But this is the point of research that is properly good. I know that's a really inelegant way of phrasing it, folks, but to do decent research involves you having to look at the accepted view, sit down and go, does that make sense? And all too often, and I am hugely guilty of this, every historian who's ever picked up a pen is guilty of this. You trust other historians, particularly if they've got a reputation, You trust other historians to have got it right. And the danger is that through regurgitation of people who are respected scholars, you end up with situations where things get missed. And so the difference between a history and a good history of the period is those people who do what Gary's done in this particular case study. You sit down and you forensically pick this apart and go, somebody might have said it. That doesn't necessarily mean that I can trust it. Folks, Glory is Fleeting is an edited collection. I forget if it's Andrew who was the editor for that one. It's available at hellion.co.uk. Go and get it. Unfortunately, I can't give you a discount code for Hellion, but it's a very reasonably priced volume anyway. So, Christmas is coming up. Ask for Santa to drop it into your stocking. Gary, you will be back at some point. Probably not in the too distant. You're not getting a choice in it. It is happening. Probably in the not too distant future either, to discuss some of your other work, but on the basis that you will have applied that same level of care and attention to your research, I think folks are going to want to read your other publications. So Wellington's First Battle, that's Boxtel in 1794. Who published that one?
I did. It's K-Shot Publishing. So
Okay.
it's self-published. I've got a few in the garage.
Fantastic. And presumably if people get in touch with you via Twitter
or by Amazon, it's on Amazon.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay, you got all of that nailed down. If you're a devotee of what I consider to be the wrong war, which is basically every war that's not Napoleonic, quite frankly, but if you're interested in World War One, The Men Behind the Memorial who's that one with? Is that one?
Again, it's one I did. It was a side project. In the village I lived in at the time, there were 24 guys on the memorial, and started out as a series of village parish magazine articles. I researched each one of them, where they came from, how they died, and I put it together with a friend in the village to raise money for the church, basically.
That's fantastic.
So it's there. It's a nice. It's not something I would normally do, but because like you, there is only one true war.
Indeed. And talking of said one true war, Wellington at Bay, Villa Muriel, 1812. We're doing an interview on that. That's just a given. We're going to sit down and discuss that. We're probably going to do an interview on Boxtel as well, because why not? And most recently, but by no means least, Throwing Thunderbolts, which is your Wargamers guide, isn't it? You were saying earlier, or in the first episode, if you're listening to this on the podcast, that you come at this through wargaming. Got to say, this is a safe space in which you can confess to that. Nobody's going to judge you. We're all devotees of painting plastic figures. We've all got that bug.
Well, I think there's a serious. One of the things that there are all types of wargamers. I'm at the nerdy end, and I think the advantage of wargaming is that you actually have to put physically things on the table. You have to consider time and motion, because that's how the games work. And so things that if you just read a history book, you might skip past. As soon as you're trying to lay it out as a scenario for a game, you're saying, well, hang on a minute, what's this 5-hour gap doing? And for example, and you are painting flags. So knowing what they are is important, and albeit nerdy in my case.
Hey, you're talking to somebody who styles themselves as the Napoleon nerd, albeit not as babyface as I used to say. Sadly, age is catching up with me, people. But Throwing Thunderbolts is on the War of the First Coalition, 1792-7. I know we have chatted about the possibility of a mini-series on the show about that, because I'm going to be quite frank and honest and say my War of the First Coalition knowledge is nowhere near as good as it needs to be, and we haven't covered it in any sense on this show until now, so we will leave that sort of tantalizing threat.
Well, there are only 280 battles to consider.
That's minor. We can do it in like 20 minutes, surely. So there you go, folks. Plenty more to look forward to, but Christmas is coming up. You've heard the quality of Gary's forensic approach to this. you're going to want to go and buy some of his work. Gary, an absolute joy to talk to you. Thank you so much for opening my and the listeners' eyes to this. I've got lots of thinking to go away and do, and I need to reach for the maps of the Salamanca battlefield, quite frankly, and start reconsidering all of this. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to having you back here very soon.
Right. Thanks for the opportunity, Zach. Really enjoyed it.
Folks, if you're new here, remember to hit the subscribe button so that you can find your way back. Much love to all my Patreon supporters, and shout outs to my Mentioned in Dispatches patrons, Rob Griffith, Brendan Teeling, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Lucy Tatner, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Stephen Colson, Jim Getz, Indiana Fats, Stephen Gillen, Rob Coughlin, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Anscombe, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Mark Trowbridge, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramus, Anthony Gumbau, Andrew Wright, Anonymous American, Martin Pisani, Ulrich Ducado, James Fluick, Roger O'Donnell, Natasha Hobday, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, David Graylick, Ted Andrews, David Malinsky, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, Adam Green, Tim Day, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Armin Darwin, Carol Dixon-Smith, Paul Gasek, and Roland Shark. And the Admirals, John Haynes, JC Kaiser, Mike Guest, Liam Telfer, Todd and Laird Campbell, Graham Swidenbank, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Maxwell, David Priest, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Dan Hazelwood, Kate Walcombe, Steve Carter, and Clemens. I'll be back very soon, but until then, I'm Zach White. This has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe, and as always, thank you for listening. Don't forget, folks, if you want to enjoy 20% off Glory is Fleeting, the book upon which much of this podcast is based, or rather the book that has the chapter upon which this podcast is based. Glory is Fleeting is available from hellion.co.uk, and if you go direct via their website and on checkout type in the discount code GLORY23, GLORY23, you will be able to enjoy 20% off of the book. Enjoy.
Hey, it's Danny Pellegrino from Everything Iconic. Ready to upgrade your style game without blowing your budget? Check out Quince. They've got all the good stuff, shirts and polos, activewear, and fine leather goods, all at 50 to 80% less than other high-end brands. And the best part? They're all about safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing. Get that luxury vibe without the luxury price tag. Hit up quince.com/upgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns on your next order. That's quince.com/upgrade.